Welcome to this explainer. I'm honestly so excited to guide you through today's topic because we're going to completely reframe how you look at world history. We are setting the stage to explore a land that has shaped global events way more than our standard modern textbooks suggest. We're talking about the Arabian Peninsula. So get ready because what you're about to hear is going to challenge some major historical assumptions.
Okay, let's dive into this. The eminent historian Philip K. Hitti pointed out a truly shocking paradox. See, despite the Arabian Peninsula's massive geographical footprint, it's a quarter the size of Europe and a third the size of America, its ancient history is almost entirely overlooked by modern historians. It's crazy, but we actually know more about the Sumerians or ancient Egyptians than we do about the original inhabitants of this vast, highly influential land. So, why is such a massive piece of the puzzle missing from our common knowledge?
To answer that, here is our roadmap for today. First, Arabia's unknown history. Second, its roots as the home of Semitic peoples. Third, its role in civilization and religion. Fourth, the knowledge hub of the Middle East. And finally, the modern transformation.
Let's start with Section 1, Arabia's Unknown History.
And this brilliantly illustrates what we're talking about. To truly understand this region, we absolutely must look beyond that common modern perception of just endless empty deserts. While the peninsula itself is huge, the civilization that poured out of it was historically unprecedented. Within just 100 years of their emergence, the Arab Empire stretched all the way from the vast Atlantic coast in the west, right to the borders of China in the east. Think about that for a second. That is literally an empire infinitely larger and more expansive than the Roman Empire at its absolute peak.
Moving right along to Section 2, the original home of Semitic peoples. You see, Arabia wasn't just a place where an empire was born later on. It was this ancient, fertile womb for some of the world's absolute foundational civilizations. Now, you've probably heard the term Semitic, but historians define it much more deeply than just a broad racial categorization. The original inhabitants of the Arabian Peninsula, who were the ancestors of the Semitic peoples, shared incredibly tight bonds. We're talking unified linguistic roots, right down to the very grammar and verb structures they used. They shared distinct physical and psychological traits, and they had a remarkably unified worldview. All of this was forged by the harsh, isolated environment of the Arabian Peninsula, a place they actually called the Island of the Arabs.
Let's move to and see how this builds over time. Driven by population growth and, that really harsh environment we just mentioned, wave after wave of these Semitic peoples migrated out of the peninsula to build the foundational empires of antiquity. Around 3500 BC, the Akkadians migrated to the Tigris and Euphrates valleys, which seeded the Great Babylonian civilization. Then by 2500 BC, the Amorites and Canaanites, and that includes the Phoenicians, reached Syria and Palestine. Jump to 1500 BC, the Aramans and Hebrews settle in that exact same region. And then around 500 BC, the Nabateans established their civilization in the north, famously building the city of Petra. So the ancient world as we know it was quite literally seeded by the sands of Arabia.
Which brings us to Section 3, World-Conquering Civilization and Religion.
The Arabian Peninsula didn't just export people and empires, though. It exported powerful philosophical and religious concepts that completely conquered the globe. Historically, Arabia is recognized as the definitive birthplace of monotheism. The deep religious impulses and the Semitic lifestyle of this region acted as the seedbed for Judaism. That, in turn, laid the historical origins for Christianity. And of course, it is the direct birthplace of Islam. The source text notes that Islam alone, emerging directly from this environment, has hundreds of millions of followers. At the time the author was writing, it was over 450 million, stretching from Morocco all the way to Indonesia, and their daily lives are still heavily shaped by the cultural roots of this single peninsula.
Now for Section 4, the knowledge hub of the Middle Ages.
Stepping into the Middle Ages, we really have to challenge the standard Eurocentric view of world history. You see, while Europe was largely languishing in what we historically term the Dark Ages, the Arabic-speaking world was experiencing an unparalleled golden age. Arabic was not just a language of religion. It was the primary language of science, culture, philosophy, and progressive thought for centuries.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Arab scholars acted as the ultimate bridge for human civilization. They didn't just conquer, they assimilated and they elevated. They preserved the ancient Greek and Roman texts that, honestly, would have otherwise been completely lost. Then, they synthesized them with Persian and Eastern wisdom. They were making massive advancements in medicine, astronomy, history, and philosophy, Without Arabic scholars curating and advancing all of this knowledge and eventually passing that torch back to Europe, the Western Renaissance as we know it simply would not have happened. No way.
Finally, Section 5, the transformation of modern Arabia.
So, the crucial point is this specific year, 1932. After centuries of fluctuating empires, the narrative of this region radically shifted, completely rewriting global geopolitics.
In 1932, right beneath those ancient desert sands, the first major oil discoveries were made. Literally overnight, the Arabian Peninsula transformed from a historical cradle of ancient civilizations into the absolute center of modern global economic and geopolitical power. By suddenly possessing the world's largest liquid energy reserves, this region became the new battleground for influence between Eastern and Western powers, and it essentially began dictating the pace of the entire modern global economy.
We have covered an incredible journey today, from the ancient Akkadians leaving the desert valleys, to the preservation of Greek philosophy, all the way to the modern oil wells of 1932. So, I want to leave you with this question to ponder. If a single peninsula can seed ancient empires, birth 3 major world religions, and completely fuel the modern global economy, how much of world history have we been looking at upside down? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I highly encourage you to look past your standard history textbooks to discover what else has been hiding in plain sight.